Right, thanks for watching. Welcome back to my mastering vlog. I've had a few comments about the audio being crap. I agree, the audio is crap. What I've decided is that um, the second somebody sends me some work and says, I sent you the work because I saw your videos on YouTube, I will buy whatever thing it is streamers use, Blue Yeti or whatever, and stick it down here somewhere so we'll get a better, you know, quality dialogue. I know it's a bit quiet. It's kind of a bit weird because I'm on a table, so you're getting some comb filtering, and it sounds a bit boxy. And my voice is like that anyway, so apologies. I hope you can still listen to this. I'm trying to make it so I'm talking quite softly and quietly anyway, because I'm trying to something you could stick on your headphones if you're trying to sleep or whatever. And because that's what I do. I like to watch technical stuff and things about audio production and the science of audio, and just reminding myself of stuff in this sort of tone where it's not like. So yeah, I'm doing this sort of mastering term and sort of audio general term glossary thing. I covered saturation in the last video. Now what I want to talk about is headroom and what headroom means and how you measure it and what to look out for if you've received some masters, for example, or if you're sending something off. So presumably we're all working with digital audio, seeing as it's 2022. The headroom is basically the distance between the last thing that you've got, your last bit of sound, essentially, data, and the highest that the actual file can go. Now, back in the early days of digital, people quickly discovered that you can abuse the headroom in CD mastering, it was at that point, and later digital files, by going right up to zero. And they would use something called brick wall limiters, which we still use today, to do that. And there was this idea on CDs that you need to leave a little bit of headroom, but then bit by bit, everybody snuck up and kept going over and on, to the point that you'll get CDs now that will sound like crap, or even just transfers from CDs onto streaming services, because they're just clipping all the time. And the reason that they're clipping all the time is because they've not let any headroom, any distance between the last bit of music and the final bit, and that's caused reconstructed peaks, and also something called true peaks, and they're kind of related. What happens now is very complicated because you'll get a lossless WAV usually, or AIFF file, and you'll upload that to a distributor, and the distributor will send that over to the platforms, Apple Music, Spotify, etc. And those platforms will then deliver your music in several different ways, more and more as they are, sort of like for like a WAV, but usually as some sort of MP3 or lossy codec, sort of MP3 type thing. The issue is that the second you change something to the frequency content of the audio, so for example MP3s where you're taking certain frequencies away and doing that, while it's being masked to try and make it so that you can't hear the differences, because that's how lossy encoding works. It's sort of a psychoacoustic, because then you're not supposed to hear it, but obviously you can hear it. But it changes the peak level. Now, depending on how the codec is applied, they'll either drop your track down a little bit to stop it clipping, or they'll allow the peaks of this newly changed waveform to go above zero. And although, yes, we use clipping in mastering sometimes and hard clipping for the sound, when you're talking about consumer playback stuff, mostly phones, so we're talking about phones, maybe going out for a walk, you're on, mobile data, and you're a sort of medium quality but not high quality MP3, going to your Bluetooth headphones. Bluetooth headphones have got their own digital to analog converters, and you're basically in the wild west of what happens with your audio at that point. So depending on the music and how much it will take these overs, essentially, which is sort of done on experience, and everyone's always arguing about this stuff. This is the thing that mastering engineers argue about a lot. we will give a certain amount of space. Now, when I'm doing the soundtrack stuff, I'll give whole 1 dB true peak, and I'll come on to that in a minute, of headroom, because if it's orchestral music, for example, something that's going to go over zero and become a clip is not likely to be a short snare or a kick drum or a hi-hat or a big synth. It's likely to be something like the crescendo of the strings. And the second that clips, that's going to sound really bad and really wrong and not a sound that people will be able to ignore. Whereas with rock and pop music and some loud forms of dance music, you can kind of get away with a little bit of clipping. So you can be a little bit riskier. And also those genres tend to have a bit more competitive loudness built in. So you might go to like minus 0.5. But more and more, I'm sticking at -1 and trying to perfect my loudness techniques so that I can get it really loud and know that whatever's going to happen, it's going to travel well to the next platform. Because if mastering's about anything, it's about that. It's about how you present the audio to go out into the world and then how people interact with that audio. Now, True Peak is something you'll start to see a lot on plugins and stuff. Brainworks have now got a True Peak limiter. The original TC System 6000 had a True Peak thing built in. And a True Peak, you can think of it almost like a true brick wall. Now, I won't go into sampling theory too much, but the way that you recreate lots of dots of a waveform into analog audio is you join the dots together into like an electrical signal, and you filter it, and that's what's it's called a reconstruction filter, a Nyquist filter. And what that does is it just gives you the frequency content of the format. So 44.1 kilohertz, for example, we would mostly be working with, which is from the CD standard. The issue is that when you're reconstructing the waveform, the bits that are creating the different samples won't always be perfectly the last bits. You have these little overs between the samples. So you've got a sample here, a sample here, and when you've done the filter, you get this little over. And that's an intersample peak. There's a couple of really good videos explaining this way better than I can, but I'm just explaining it for practical terms. Just because your final bit is right at the top doesn't mean that when the wave is reconstructed, it's not going to clip downstream. So what True Peak does is, usually the way it works is it oversamples the audio and then applies a limiter as if it was a higher sample rate and then resamples back down. So it means that you'll get more limiting, but it avoids you having clipping in the future. So some people say, I don't like the sound of True Peak limiting, and really what they're saying is they don't like the sound of more limiting, because the actual limiter itself, the compressor that makes the limiter, is still essentially doing the same thing, which is why you can click the sound like Ozone Maximizer, which is like basically the king of limiters at this point, which I use a lot, especially for rock music and pop music and dance music. You can just click on and off True Peak. It's not baked into it, and you can actually see that it digs in more. So in that situation, you're using that True Peak feature to basically have more control over your headroom. So just to recap, the headroom in digital audio is the distance between the highest peak, or the highest reconstructed peak if we're talking about playback, and digital zero, which is where anything going over becomes a clip. And the reason that we leave headroom, and the reasons why you'll sometimes, if you load your waveform into something and you have a look at it, Wavelab or Logic or whatever, you'll see there's actually a gap. It doesn't go right up to zero, and it shouldn't let the clip light come on your player. It's been mastered properly, and that is because headroom has been left for those reconstructions. So I hope that makes sense. Let me know if that doesn't, or if you have any questions, put them in the comments. I'm going to do some more research into terms that people find confusing, and I'm going to try and explain them in this way. Apologies for the sound. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.